I'm Jim Hansen. I'm now a climate scientist. I started out a planetary scientist, but I found out that the most interesting planet is the one we live on. Because for one thing, it's changing. It's changing before our eyes, and that's going to have an impact on us, but especially on our children and grandchildren and future generations. Last time the planet was 2 degrees warmer, sea level was 20 feet higher. And that's where we would be headed. It's not going to happen quickly. That's why this is a really difficult problem, because the people who are putting the gases up there are not going to see most of the effect. They see some of it. We can see changes are beginning to happen. But the big changes are going to be felt by young people and their children. The IPCC report that just came out is a very conservative report. The reservation that I have about it is that they're sort of taking it for granted that we're going to continue to burn fossil fuels rapidly. And so they're saying, well, gee, you should try to limit it to 1,000 gigatons of carbon. So far, we've burned 370 gigatons of carbon in oil, gas, and coal. That's enough to have warmed up the planet back to the highest level of the Holocene, the last 10,000 years. But if we burn 1,000 gigatons, that will guarantee that we get about 2 degrees Celsius warming just from what we call the fast feedbacks. As we cause this warming effect, it causes the oceans to evaporate more water vapor, and that amplifies the warming. And that we know would 1,000 gigatons would cause about 2 degrees Celsius warming. But there are slow feedbacks in the system. The ice sheets begin to melt, and that's an amplifying feedback because it exposes darker surfaces underneath, darker than the snow ice-covered area. That causes more warming, it absorbs more sunlight. And also the vegetation distribution. As the planet gets warmer, we're going to have forests moving all the way up to the Arctic Ocean. Those forests are darker than the tundra, and that causes more warming. And also we can cause gases to begin to come out of the tundra and out of the continental shelves where there's methane hydrates. So those feedbacks would mean that the total warming eventually would be 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. Then you're talking about a very different planet. So we really can't do that. The IPCC report, I think, should really say, hey, we've already burned about as much carbon as we can afford to. We've got to figure out some energy systems that don't produce so much carbon. The amount of carbon that I think we can burn, if we want to stay close to the Holocene, is only about 500 gigatons of carbon, and we've already burned 370. So that means we don't have much left. And in addition, we're going to have to do a better job of reforesting and improving our agricultural and our forestry practices so that the soils contain more carbon and the biosphere, the forests, contain more carbon. We can do that, and it makes sense for other reasons. But we have to actually do that. And the main thing is, we just can't burn all the fossil fuels. And yet, the fossil fuel industry and our governments do not seem to understand that. Somebody's got to really, go pound on the president's desk and go really make clear, we can't burn all that stuff. It doesn't make sense to be developing tar shale or tar sands. It's very carbon intensive energies. They just don't make any sense. We've got to phase off. We've got to solve this fossil fuel addiction. The reason that I got arrested during the tar sands protest was just to draw attention to the stupidity of setting up an infrastructure to get this very carbon-intensive energy out of the ground. It's using about 50% more carbon to get a given amount of energy. It doesn't make sense. We've still got conventional oil and gas in the Middle East and the United States and other places, enough to fill up the budget of carbon that we can afford to burn. So it doesn't make sense to be developing these really dirty, unconventional fossil fuels. what gives me some hope is, first of all, we're beginning to see climate effects, so that the public and policymakers can see that this is a real issue. But also, I'm encouraged by the fact that now the biggest user of fossil fuels is China. But China is run by engineers. The political leaders have engineer training. They're not denying the climate issue. They can see climate change is already affecting China. They have a lot of air pollution from burning fossil fuels. So they have strong incentives for solving this problem. And I think they can help lead us in the right direction. But it's going to take cooperation, because it's going to have to be a global solution. And that means we're going to have to put a price on carbon.